Hey guys, Parfax here, and today I'm bringing you an in-depth guide on tanking. Now, for this, I didn't want to do it myself because I'm not as good of a tank as, well, one of the best tanks that I've ever played with in the game. His name is Crypto. He's gonna be your guide. I had him teach me like I was brand new to tanking, that I've never tanked before. We recorded it, put it into a video. We even have some clips of him tanking a barnacles. So we will have those sprinkled in here with the video as well. And then we'll have the rest of that clip or the rest of that barnacles run at the end of the video. This is an extremely long video, as you can see here. I believe it's over an hour. Like, I'm assuming it's gonna be like an hour and 20 minutes ish. So this is a very long video. We're gonna have timestamps so you can kind of move to each spot, but he goes over pretty much everything there is to know about base tanking. If you guys enjoyed this video and you want to see him tank or discuss how to tank specific dungeons like Dynasty, Tempest, all that kind of stuff, especially mutations, we can do that. Obviously, we do have to have the mutation up to be able to tank it, so keep that in mind whenever we go to do this. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think of this video in the description down below. I plan on doing a healing and a DPS version of this, so hope you guys enjoyed this video. Like, comment, subscribe, like always, and I hope you enjoy. Also, one last thing, I do know some of the audio is a little bit wonky. It's actually my fault. I didn't have the mic where I normally record. I have it when I'm normally talking in Discord. So you're going to see a few audio fluctuations. I tried to get it pretty decent, but especially in the instances where we are either fighting a mob or we are sort of talking at the same time, my voice is going to be significantly lower than Crypto. So I hope you guys can still hear most stuff what I'm saying. But let's be honest, nothing I say is really important. So I hope you guys enjoy the video.
All right, so the two things, there's two sides that you can use when you're tanking. You can either go with the Swordmaster side of the tree, which is offensive, or the Defender, the defensive side of the tree. If you are looking to have an optimized group, you will always be on the Swordmaster side of the tree. But in a lot of cases, that's going to be dependent on having a healer that is very competent, as well as really strong high output DPS. The harder the dungeons get and the lower quality the rest of your team is, you might need to do the defender side of the tree just so that you have the survivability you need to keep everyone else alive. The main thing to keep in mind is that your job as the tank is not to survive alone. It is everyone's job is to survive. Your job is to gather all the aggro, absolutely everything you possibly can, get it attacking you, centralize them, position the mobs to where your DPS can get them down as efficiently as possible. So if we're looking at the Swordmaster side of the tree, we will want to have Empowered Stab. I'm just going from left to right on each row on the offensive side. We'll want Empowered Stab. That's going to let your heavy attacks give you a 30% empower. Super important, because the more damage you do, you are then multiplying that by 3, and that is, well, that's not the exact equation, but you're doing 3 times more threat for each amount of damage that you do compared to a DPS. So the more damage you do, the more threat you generate. The next one over, Achilles Heel. The final attack of your light attack also inflicts slow, and that pairs well with some of the other abilities we're going to be talking about. Staying on the Swordmaster side, next is Precision, where it'll increase your critical strike chance. To the right of that, we have Freeing Justice, where a heavy attack can cause you to lose a debuff. That one's not super important. You could switch that out with another ability on this side, but you do have to take quite a few of the abilities from the Swordmaster side in order to get leadership down at the bottom. Mobility, moving 33% faster while blocking. Again, that one's not super important, so you could switch that out with something else. Counterattack, when you block, you gain a stack of Empower. That one's really important, so definitely pick that one up. And then Leaping Strike. This is going to give you a lot of mobility. If you have a mob that's just outside of your AoE taunt range, then you're going to want to use Leaping Strike on them as they're trying to dive on your healer. Just going down below Leaping Strike, these are the two optional ones I was talking about. If you wanted to, you could have Final Strike and Cowardly Punishment as well. That's kind of up to you how you want to balance those with the two that I had previously said you could skip. Opportunist deals 10% more damage to slowed foes, which pairs well with your third attack of your light chain, giving slow to your enemies. Confidence is good. You're going to find yourself at full health quite a bit since you are the focus of all heals. And then critical precision. I love having this, especially in Tempest, where speed is of the essence in those fire circles. And finally, all of those we need in order to get leadership, which is going to be a massive boost for the damage that our team can put out. It's the equivalent of giving another tier of trophy for whatever dungeon we're in.
Okay.
On the defender side, we need sturdy shield. That gives us another 15% physical armor. We need sturdy grip, which is huge. If you can only have one thing, if you have one thing unlocked in the entire thing, you need sturdy grip. Shield bash. That is going to not only stagger your opponent, but most importantly, that is one additional taunt, a single target taunt, or if they're tightly grouped, you can hit a few with them. Defensive training. When you block, you get fortify. So that combined with the other one, every time we block, we get 10% fortify plus 3% empower. You want everything that goes under Defender's Resolve, previously known as Defiant Stance. And then at the bottom right, next to the last of the Defender's Resolve, you want recuperation so that you can get a boost in healing and regeneration.
So when you're taking the offensive side, you're not taking like elemental resistance and stuff like that?
So on that, you can play around a little bit. So for example, restoration is not super important. So that's the very last perk on Defender's Resolve. You could drop that if you're worried about incoming elemental resistance. You could pick that up instead. Because all the last perk there does is it gives you 15% of your max health at the end of Defender's Resolve. But if you've got a strong healer, then you shouldn't be dependent on that perk to stay alive.
Okay. So let's do the more of the defensive side now.
All right, so looking at the defensive side of the tree, going for a defensive build with the tank. This is one you'll want to use if you are with a weaker group overall, or even if just the healer is not quite on their A game. The defensive side of the tree is how you're going to stay alive if you're worried about a healer going down. It's also super, super helpful if you are going up against Chartis. You can block for days, even against, or sorry, not Chartis. What's the one before Chartis?
Oh, Scylla?
Yeah, Scylla. This is how people get up to 25 stacks on Scylla. There's no other way I can think of that it would be possible. So looking at the defensive side of the tree, we're going to start out with the sturdy shield and the sturdy grip. We talked about those in the last one. And then the shield rush is going to be one of our most crucial abilities for this build. You're going to take everything straight down the shield rush side. The reason we're doing this is because shield rush gives us fortify when we have the fortifying shield rush either on our shield, which I would recommend, or you could also have it on armor if you don't have a shield with fortifying shield rush on it. The improved rush is also really helpful to keep your group alive, as it reduces the damage output of whatever you use shield rush on by 10%, making that boss or that mob weaker. Again, you'll want shield bash. It's always important to have an extra taunt. You will not take any of the extra perks with shield bash. Those are always and forever terrible. Elemental resistance, we're going to pick that up. Defensive training as well. Then we will need a Defender's Resolve again with all the perks. Or if you wanted to lose that last, actually no, you need that last perk. If your healer is down, that's what this build has in mind. You need the last perk on that as well. The most important perk that we are picking up here on the defensive side is Invigorating Bulwark. This gives you 15 stamina when hitting a target with Shield Bash or Shield Rush. So this is how you're going to always be able to keep your shield up when needed. And yeah, you can't underestimate that ability. It is just so crucial. So when you find yourself low on your shield against Scylla or against whatever enemy, you just use Shield Rush, giving you that fortify, get a few swings in, and you're back at full stamina because of the Invigorating Bulwark, as well as that added stamina or that added fortify that keeps you alive. Final blow to the left of that gives you some added threat, which is helpful because your damage output is just a little bit decreased on this side of the tree. Recuperation, always important to get those extra heals and regeneration. And then on the offensive side, we're going to pick up 4 abilities. First, we have Empowering Stab, getting that 30% empower. Freeing Justice, where you are going to be losing a debuff every time you do a heavy attack. Precision, getting that critical chance increase, and mobility to be able to move faster while blocking. There are some scenarios where if you're blocking and moving backwards, you're able to avoid some of the hits that are coming in. But overall, at first, I used to think that was a really, really good perk when I first started out tanking, so it might be helpful to you. But as you get further along in tanking, you're not going to be moving as much while you're blocking. You're actually going to find yourself blocking a lot less. And that is the defensive side of the tree.
So when it comes to your secondary weapon, I know we talked that you basically only use Warhammer. Before we go into the Warhammer tree, are there any weapons that you would even think about using? I know we've talked a little bit about things like the Great Sword, but why do you choose the Warhammer over essentially any other weapon?
Well, to be honest, the Warhammer is all I've ever used, and it has never let me down, so I don't have any experience tanking with any other weapon. I've heard of lots of people using the Greatsword, but I believe the Greatsword should be a replacement to the Sword and Shield for like lower level dungeons. I haven't seen anybody using it at M10 level, but maybe I just don't know the right people. Maybe there's somebody out there who is, but it's hard to beat the damage boost that you get from leadership with the Sword and Shield as your main. But as a secondary, Greatsword doesn't make a ton of sense to me because it doesn't have a lot of CC. Its defensive abilities also use stamina, and so you don't want 2 of your weapons to be using your stamina. You want to be able to switch to your back bar weapon when you're out of stamina, or to be able to give some kind of utility to the rest of your team. And the Warhammer really does that well with its CCs. It has knockdowns, it has the stun from Shockwave, and one of the most important things that the Warhammer can do is its 20% rend from Armor Breaker. One argument that could be made as another secondary is the Hatchet. The second life you get with the Hatchet is incredible. So some tanks love to use the Hatchet. It also has a really good AoE taunt going into Berserk. I could be wrong, but I believe that has a wider range than Defiant Stance, or whatever they changed it to with the Sword and Shield, the Defender's Resolve now. So I think it has a wider AoE taunt. What's that?
So they're the same now. They're both 8 meters.
Okay, so they're the same now. So either way, 8 meter taunt is actually better than any taunt that's on the Warhammer, which is the Shockwave. However, those taunts don't come with a stun. So there's an argument that could be made for the Hatchet, but I would say Warhammer is all I'm qualified to speak on. So that's what we're going to be diving into here.
Yeah, I know when it comes to, if anybody's ever asked me, it's kind of like, I feel like you're being super selfish if you don't pick the Warhammer. That may be like a little bit controversial, but in my opinion, at least, the Warhammer is by far the best secondary weapon to tank with. Like the secondary weapon, it just provides so much crap that your group now doesn't need to handle. Like you get so much rend, you get CC, you get pretty much everything.
Agree. Again, there's always an argument to be made with the Hatchet. I know you can use the throw, so you can pick up some aggro from a distance if you needed to, but again, I haven't really done any runs with it, so yeah. All
right, so let's go down the tree.
All right, so I only ever use one build with the Warhammer, and we're just going to go left to right all the way across. All right, I'm just taking it from the top with the Warhammer. On the top left, we have Armor Breaker. So for Armor Breaker, we need to go down 2 perks to Lasting Trauma. The rend is the entire purpose of Armor Breaker, so you've got to pick that up. I will say the weapon perk that goes with Armor Breaker is complete trash. Do not put it on anything unless it just conveniently happens to already be on a piece of armor that has the ward you want. Epitome of Bonk and Hammer Time, we're going to need to pick up both of those because the more damage we can do, the more aggro we can hold. And then on the Crowd Crusher side at the top, we have Outnumbered, and I can do this all day. I can do this all day is going to help us if we are accidentally blocking with our Warhammer when we meant to block with the shield. It's going to be a lot less punishing to make that mistake, so I recommend picking it up. There's not a lot of other abilities that I would say are better than that as far as the ones that we can pick once we've picked these 20. Hardened Steel is the next one on the Juggernaut side. This one is super important because not because of the grit that it adds, because you should already be over 300 strength, so your Warhammer attacks should already have grit on them, but the 12% damage reduction is very, very helpful. When you find yourself out of stamina, you need to switch to your Warhammer, use Wrecking Ball to get the fortify, the 20% fortify that comes with Wrecking Ball, and then do heavy attacks while you are waiting for your stamina to come back. So as you're taking damage, you're taking 30% less damage than you would otherwise. Obviously, that is if you don't have your Defiant Stance up. I keep calling it Defiant Stance. Defender's Resolve. And then next over, we have Shockwave. You want everything for Shockwave. Maximize the radius of your Shockwave. Stun everything. Do keep in mind that Shockwave can now be blocked, which is a little bit of a nerf, but still really good for picking up aggro and for stuns. For opponents that don't have shields. Then we have guarded sprint. So while you are running towards an enemy, if you are anticipating any damage coming your way from mages or whatever it would be, switch over to your Warhammer for this reason, unless you already have some fortify stacked up on your sword side. Next, on the Juggernaut side, we have Contemption, where you can increase your heavy attack damage. Again, more damage, more aggro. Wrecking Ball, we want everything, maximizing the radius of Wrecking Ball to knock down more opponents, keep them in place while your DPS finishes the job. Again, keep in mind that second perk on the Wrecking Ball. That's the real reason that this is so good. That 20% fortify for 7 seconds is going to be a big difference maker, especially if you're running out of other abilities on your sword. Quick recovery still on the Juggernaut side. Gives you cooldown for your heavy attacks. So really helpful to just be able to use your abilities more often. Depending on the dungeon you're in, you might want to just keep staying with your Warhammer and hammering away. But for the most part, you probably want to switch back to your sword so that that 10% damage boost from leadership can be active. Finishing off the Juggernaut side, we also want Power Through Pain. You're going to be getting attacked a lot, so you can basically always count on being hit, and therefore doing an extra 35% damage because of that. The last ability that we have on the Crowd Crusher side is Concussive Impact. A little bit increased damage. This one you could swap out with something else if you wanted, so look around at some of the ones we don't have selected, and if there's one that sounds better to you, feel free to use that. This one's not super important.
Okay, so let's talk about attributes, because I know this one, I think people are gonna be very surprised at where your attributes end up.
So when I'm tanking, it depends on what I'm tanking. If I'm tanking a regular dungeon and I have full warded gear in heavy armor, I will do as little constitution as possible. That's never 0 because of my armor, or 5, I guess, is the minimum. I would honestly do 5 in a regular dungeon with fully warded heavy armor, and then just put everything else into strength. But if you are doing a mutation, that is obviously not going to cut it. Also, if you don't have fully warded gear, that is not going to cut it for a regular dungeon. For a regular dungeon with non-warded gear, especially if you're just learning to tank, go ahead and start out with 200 con. As you get better without warded gear and you start to learn the attack patterns of the mobs and the bosses, you can go down to 150 con. Once you get warded gear and you have the experience, you're going to be able to do dungeons as the tank, basically dodging and dancing your whole way through. And Constitution is not what everyone thinks it is. So the real purpose in your stats needs to be geared toward having just enough Constitution to not die. You never want to be able to be one-shot by anything. And not combo killed either. So there's some bosses that'll knock you down and then keep hitting you. So as long as you can survive those, a good healer can bring you back from the verge of death. What you need is as much strength as you can possibly get without sacrificing your life, because the more strength that you have, the more damage you do, and that's what's going to allow you to keep aggro over your DPS, over your healer, and to keep everyone else alive. Your job is to stay alive just enough so that you can have all of the aggro. It's okay that your health gets low, but you will want to have lots and lots of strength so that you can be just constantly getting more aggro.
So even if you were going into you're just starting mutations, you're new, would you still go the 200 con, 300 strength?
Do I have ward in this scenario?
No. So let's say you're starting off no ward.
All right, so if you have no ward, it's been a long time since I've been in that
I know.
situation. Let's see. Actually, I didn't have full ward when I first made it through M10s as a 5 or as a 623. So I probably would have been doing. Yeah, I would say I was probably doing 300 con before I was full warded. Now that's gonna make you very dependent on your taunts, because it's going to be a lot harder for you to keep the aggro as you're doing less damage. One thing to keep in mind is the real reason you're leveling up con is not only to just stay alive, but you also want the perks along the way. So if we look at those, you're going to be getting 20% more consumables from the first 50. The next 100 gives you a little bit more health. And as a tank, that's increased even more because you have more armor. The 150 bonus is completely useless in dungeons because you don't take critical damage. But then the 200 bonus of having 10% bonus to physical and elemental armor, that one is a big one. And that's why having 200 exactly is super important for mutations, where the bosses, where the mobs just hit that much harder. You're standing in fire, void circles, whatever it is. That 200 perk is really the only reason, because you'll notice as you start to play with your stats, I don't know if you want to respec on your side just to show that, you'll notice that your health doesn't move that much as you get higher and higher. And so the difference between having 12,000 health and 15,000 health, that's not that big of a difference. That's not something that's going to make or break, assuming you have a good healer and you're able to mitigate damage well. If you're not able to mitigate damage well, then you do need a little bit more health. But again, having an extra 1,000 health, if you don't know the attack patterns of the bosses, that's not going to save you. So skill is the most important thing, and experience in a dungeon, knowing when to dodge, when to block. But most of the time, just be swinging your sword, applying those CCs and the Rens.
Yeah, I think that's going to be something that people completely underestimate. And I think it's actually also a good thing that the 300 strength passive gives you grit, because we're going to talk about that here soon, but you're going to be getting hit from the boss a lot when you're not blocking. I think everybody wants to initially, your normal tanks just hold block, right? Taunt, hold block, taunt, hold block, taunt, hold block, which we're going to talk about that here soon, but it is nice to even have that grit. There's not that many bosses. Well, I guess they do stagger quite a bit, and we'll talk about that. But I think that 300 strength passive is pretty underrated too. Because I think when people watch this, they're gonna expect you to go just 500 con. But like you said, It's really hard to control aggro that way, and it's just not needed by any stretch. It doesn't make you that much more tankier.
No. So yeah, that 300 strength is really make or break. The only reason you would ever want to sacrifice the 300 strength grit for constitution is if you are truly just getting beat up. But at that point, that's more of a practice issue or a damage mitigation issue than it really is a health issue. So 200 con, 300 strength is golden. Grit on every attack, that's going to allow you to keep attacking where you otherwise would have gotten knocked down. You're able to stay on your feet without wasting stamina on some of the lesser attacks that are more CC focused from bosses, that'll knock you down but not do that much damage. You're able to just swing through those. One that comes to mind is Chartis's attacks, just holding left click, swinging through his knockdowns. They don't do a ton of damage, so you're fine, but you're able to keep swinging and keep applying constant damage there. So yeah, 300 strength is the most survivability centered perk out of everything on here except for the 200 con. So those two pair really well. The 200 con, the 300 strength perks can't be, you can't overlook that grit. We need that grit.
Okay, yeah, I think people are going to be surprised when we see about that. So let's talk about gear, everybody's favorite topic. Because I think this is going to be, it's not controversial at all, but I think this will be a little bit different too. So let's talk about armor first, because this is going to be, I think, pretty easy. So let's rank your best perks, like from the perk you have to have the second to third, because there's only a handful of perks you really even can use in PvE. So kind of remember how you gear your character.
First of all, get out of your trash void bin. That does nothing in a dungeon. Finally,
I may have a pair of legs on that are void bent currently.
yeah. I mean, I'm wearing void bent just because I've got a nice matching set for the video to be visually appealing. But I would never in a million years wear this into a dungeon. So the most important thing for a dungeon is you need warded gear. So let me find some of my gear. So Lost Ward for a Lost Dungeon, Angry Earth Ward for an Angry Earth Dungeon. The Ward's the most important thing. And honestly, even at the M10 level, aside from a select few weapon perks, you could get by with blue armor that just has Lost Ward or Corrupted Ward or whichever ward it is. So that's the most important. The next most important for me, the one that I would love to have in every single armor piece is going to be Refreshing Ward. There are some who would argue that regular Refreshing is better or as good. It is not close. As a tank, Refreshing Ward is going to give you a significantly better return for your investment on the refreshing side. So Refreshing Ward is the number 2 perk. If we were to put these in tiers, your ward itself, so your Ancient Ward, that's S tier. A tier would be Refreshing Ward. B tier would be Refreshing. Then another perk after that. Anything else is icing on the cake except for a few select weapon perks. So the weapon perks that you need to have, this could be on your weapon or it could be on your armor. You have to have Sundering Shockwave. You need to be able to apply that extra rend. Then the Warhammer itself gives you 30% rend that you are able to apply all on your own. That is an insane amount of rend, especially as a tank. A lot of teams that are less experienced underestimate the amount of rend the tank can put out. So if you have those two, that's going to be huge. Another very helpful perk to have is going to be the Accelerated Defiant Stance, or whatever it's called now, Accelerated Resolve, that gives you increased speed right after you do your big AoE taunt with the sword and shield. Depending on the dungeon, that can even be a life or death scenario. So in Nation, that can really, really help you to stay alive. In Genesis, if your team gets several downs and your healer gets knocked down, you just have to run for your life while the DPS try and get the healer back up, and having that accelerated resolve is really helpful. If you're on the defensive side of the tree, then it's going to be really helpful to have the Fortifying Shield Rush. So that's a big one. If you're on the defensive side, you shouldn't be on the defensive side for most dungeons, but as you're like getting out, starting out as a tank, learning the ropes, you might want to start out on that side. It has a lot more margin for error, especially with the fortified that you get from Shield Rush. I believe off the top of my head, those are the only 3 important ones, and the only must-have is the Sundering Shockwave. You can get by without the other 2.
Okay. So let's talk about jewelry.
All right. Finally, I get to put this in a Parfax video. Stamina Recovery is the best perk in the game, and no one can convince me otherwise. Stamina Recovery, not Fortified Recovery, is what you want as a tank, and honestly, probably any other role in the game. Stamina Recovery, when you are hit while below 50%, you get 98 stamina back. That's if it's at 625. That is essentially your entire stamina bar. And so that is an extra life. When you find yourself about to die, you're immediately able to dodge again or put up your shield again, depending on the scenario you find yourself in. And so you get another life. And as you're able to get those extra dodges or all those extra blocks, your healer's able to bring you back to full health, and you're back to where you started, feeling fine. Not only that, but this amazing ability only has a 30-second cooldown, whereas Fortified Recovery has a 90-second cooldown, I believe. So Stamina Recovery is just amazing. It is an additional life. You have to have it. I would say it is more important than having health on an amulet. Luckily, you don't have to choose between health and stamina recovery. You get them both on the Reinforced Tempestuous Amulet of the Soldier that Parfax should have in front of him right now.
I'm hovering over it.
All right. And that also has Fortified, which is amazing. I really don't think you can get a better amulet than this. And the best part is, because this is from a dungeon, you're able to switch out that gem if you want to. So if you find yourself in a scenario where you're not taking as much physical damage, or maybe you want to have one that has fire resistance or something, whatever you want to do, you can switch that out if you want. If you don't have this ring, I would say even a purple one with stamina recovery and health is better than anything else. I would take stamina recovery and health over any combination of perks that only had one of those two and then two of something else.
Would you say, so Biss, would it be, do you think it's health, fortified stamina recovery, or do you think it's health, divine stamina recovery, or refreshing ward, or?
I think that with the perk that you get on the sword and shield side that already increases your incoming healing by 10%, I would say fortified is better to have that increased damage mitigation. Big thing to keep in mind is that your fortified buffs don't switch whenever you switch weapons. So whenever you proc something like fortifying shield rush or accelerated resolve, you want to stick with that weapon as long as you intend to be taking hits as opposed to blocking or dodging. So onto the ring then. So the ring, it has to have hardy, and honestly, a blue ring with hardy is good enough. If you have hardy, then you're good. If you don't have hardy, you're dead. Hardy gives you an extra 10 stamina, so you've got 110 stamina instead of just 100. This lets you dodge twice back to back, or to block one or two extra times, maybe even more if you're blocking weaker mobs. So you can't go without hardy. My next pick would be refreshing ward, because again, just being able to use your cooldowns, your taunts faster is going to help a lot. Refreshing ward is another thing you could put in with stamina recovery and health on the amulet. I would even say I would take refreshing ward over what was the one you suggested, divine.
Yeah.
Just because you're getting that extra cooldown, and I don't find that divine has ever made a life or death noticeable difference for me. My biggest focus as a tank is always, which of these abilities am I noticing? And I'm definitely noticing hardy. On my ring, I also have leeching. You don't need leeching. I actually was running M10s yesterday, didn't even realize I didn't have the right ring on. It only had refreshing ward and hardy and luck. So I had luck instead of leeching, didn't even notice. So really, just hardy alone is enough, and then you can kind of play around with what you think would be the best perks after that. For the earring, again, refreshing ward. The teardrop is going to be the go-to for this. I think I linked it in company, and you can hover over the traits there. For the earring, what you have to have is refreshing toast. Being able to use your potions and with less gap between them is very, very important. Regenerating, I like a lot. It helps quite a bit. There's also an argument to be made for stamina regeneration instead of regenerating. You can't get that on the teardrop, but in my experience, regenerating has been a lot more consistent for me than stamina recovery. And refreshing ward is what I go with for my third perk. And the teardrop has all three of those. Again, the more things you can get refreshing ward on, you're going to start to notice that you are turning your massive cooldown for the Defender's Resolve into a matter of like 12 seconds instead of like 45 or something. So onto the swords then. So you need a sword that has strength or con on it. That's the same for all of these. My preference is to get things with strength because it's easier to find. You'll find a lot of the drops from dungeons put constitution on everything. So the more things you can get with strength, the less you'll be struggling to get to that 300 strength threshold. So the sword I'm looking at has refreshing move. If your sword does not have refreshing move, you are using the wrong sword. You need to find a sword with refreshing move, and truly any sword with refreshing move can be made tankable. So Parfex has, I think, 2 in his inventory. Infernus, or has at least 1, Infernus. And then
I had the Omen, but I forget the other one. There's another one that you can
Omen
get.
is trash. I don't think Omen has refreshing.
No, it doesn't. I forget.
Move on it.
I was thinking there's the one that drops from oh god, in Shattered Mountain off of the Brute at the very end. I forget what it's called, but it also had, there's like 3 or 4 swords that have refreshing move on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of open world PvE sword pickups that you can find. Deep Root is another one. I used that one for a very long time. But my favorite next ability is going to be Trenchant Rend. So if you can get Refreshing Move and Trenchant Rend on a sword, that is an awesome combo. Having one more Rend, especially when you get into mutations where you have silence applied to you, or you get punished for using your abilities, you can just use a heavy attack to apply Rend, and it can add up quite a bit. The same is true for the Warhammer. Love using Trenchant Rend. On the current sword that I have, I was running with a crazy decked out DPS crew, so I needed to up my own damage output. So the sword that I'm using has Lost Bane and Enchanted in addition to Refreshing Move. You want a Bane or Enchanted as opposed to Hated, in my experience at least, just because that extra damage that you're doing is then multiplied threefold by your Carnelian Gem. So it's better to do more damage and generate threat that way, as you're helping your team more with more damage than just Hated, which is purely increasing your threat generation. A Bane is obviously better than Enchanted for any dungeon, but again, you'd have to have a specific sword for each dungeon. So as you're starting out, anything with Refreshing Move is good enough and will get the job done. All right, so with the shields, there is one perk that you absolutely have to have. If you do not have Sturdy on your tower shield, you are doing tanking wrong. Sturdy is going to reduce the stamina damage that you take and let you take a lot more blocks and allow you to recover and adjust a lot more quickly. In addition to Sturdy, there's several other perks that would be good along the way. One could be Accelerated Resolve, being able to move faster after your main sword Taunt. If you are in a mutated dungeon, then you could consider using a Flame Shield Ward or a Void Shield Ward or whatever shield ward you want to use. Also, you can get the wards like Angry Earth Ward and Lost Ward on the shield itself as well. And another thing to consider getting on the shield is Sturdy Energy. So I would say the perfect shield for a mutator in which you don't need to move super fast would be Sturdy, a ward, and Sturdy Energy. If you already have Sturdy Energy on your chest piece, then you do not want to have it redundantly on your shield. In that case, you could put in a different perk. Now, if it's a dungeon where it's really important in some situations to move quickly, such as Tempest, then you want to have accelerated Defiant Stance, Accelerated Resolve on your shield itself, because that's going to make you move 33% faster. You're going to be a speed demon. No one's going to realize you're even in heavy armor for how fast you're moving. Really, really helpful. But those are the main perks that you want to have on the tower shield. Onto the Warhammer. This is your secondary, so it's not as important what you have on your Warhammer. Trenchant Rend is one that I love to have, as well as Trenchant Recovery. Either of those can be really good. I found myself struggling to stay alive for quite a while in Barnacles, especially as I was trying to figure out the dungeon for the first time. And if you are finding yourself in that situation as you're learning all of these new dungeons from the tank perspective, Trenchant Recovery can be a very forgiving perk for you, giving 40% of the damage you do for every heavy attack back to you as health. Having a Bane on your Warhammer is also really good, but again, you would need a specific hammer for each dungeon. So Trenchant Recovery or Trenchant Rend would be the two that I look for. Hated wouldn't be bad either. Or if you don't have it on your armor, then you will want to put your Sundering Shockwave on your Warhammer.
Yeah, because I think that's going to be a little bit interesting for people, because I don't think they think of ever putting Bane, especially, on a weapon for tanking. But yeah, I mean, it's all about how much damage you do even as a tank, and I think I don't think people quite understand that. At least that's the way threat works in this game.
Yeah, as a tank, I've been in several dungeons where I found myself doing as much or more than some of the DPS. You're essentially a heavy armor DPS if you're tanking well.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about gems. I know when it comes to mutations, you're just going to want to put whatever mutation you're doing. So if it's a fire mutation, you want to put rubies in your gem or in your gear, but in carnelians in your weapons. But when it comes to rune glass gems, are there any of them that you use?
So right now, the Rune Glass gems, super expensive to get. And you're switching out your armor gems pretty much every time a new rotation rolls around. So unless you have a specific armor piece that you want to put in a Rune Glass for and just use that armor piece no matter what, it's not really practical to be switching out your gems constantly. I would say it is worth putting in a energizing runestone gem if you have like a helmet that you know you're always going to wear, because that's the one that has your weapon perk on it, or your chest piece, because that's just the only chest piece that you have. And then you can get away with, for your mutations, just putting 4 of the elemental gems in your armor pieces, or you could also always put it into any dungeon dropped jewelry pieces that you have. The Rune Glass gems don't go in your jewelry pieces, so I thought that they might, and I tried, but sadly that does not work. So I would recommend the Energizing Rune Glass gem, maybe just one, just because you can't keep constantly switching those out. They do get really, really expensive. But from a limited amount of testing I've done, it seems like my stamina starts its regeneration count just a little bit sooner. As soon as I proc that +1 or that +3 stamina from the Energizing Rune Glass gem, it seems to be coming back just a little bit faster. So I think there's a use for that there. However, I have done several dungeons now with a regular Carnelian and several with a Energizing Taunt Carnelian. You really notice that loss of the 50% threat, but even worse, AGS has said that they fixed it, but there is still something that's not quite right about the glass gems for their taunt. So on several occasions, even recently, I've found that my taunt's not getting quite as much reach, or there's some mobs that seem unaffected by it. So for now, I would say, especially for your main weapon, definitely stick with just a straight up pristine Carnelian.
Okay, and when it comes to your Heartrune gems, do you have any preference there, or?
I haven't messed around a lot with the Heartrunes. Stone form seems to me to be a pretty obvious pick. You could probably make an argument for Grasping Vines as well. I haven't done a lot of experimentation with those yet, though.
Yeah, that's. I figured this one's going to be just whatever realistically you want to use. You want to do some extra damage, deal extra damage if you want to deal, the heart. Was it the Heartrune gem stone form? I figured that one. Right now I'm showing them I have the one that gives you fortify and just gives you a bunch of fortify. You're going to get a ton of fortify with this the way you have it set up anyway, but I guess it is a little bit extra fortify. So we've talked a lot about gearing, trees, pretty much everything. So when you go in and picture us doing a las, so picture us doing like a las. When you go in there, how do you start? Do you walk up and do you just start basic attacking mobs? Do you use the abilities? Does it depend on what dungeon you're doing? And then when it comes to bosses, I know we talked a little bit about it, but how do you continuously generate taunt?
So the key as the tank is to be swinging your sword more than you are holding up your shield. Every swing of your sword is going to give you, because you have refreshing move, it's going to get you closer to using those taunts again. It's going to get you closer to being able to use your leaping strike or your shield rush. So you want to get as many light attacks in with your shield as you can. However, you do need to also keep in mind that your heavy attack gives you a 30% in power. So you should be doing a heavy attack before you do any of your regular attacks. You only want to use your shield when you really need it. And everything's situational as a tank. So there are many occasions. The final boss, for example, in Genesis, when she's doing her head slam, you don't want to be caught holding your shield. You just want to do a quick dodge and get back to attacking. You'll notice as you start to do a lot more dodges, as opposed to just blindly blocking everything as a tank, you're able to get a lot more hits in, and good things happen. So you want to be swinging your sword more than blocking. However, also keep in mind all those buffs that come along with getting a few blocks in. So if you get a block first, you get 10% fortify. So then you can go back to swinging, and also with each block you get 3% in power. So blocking has its uses in offense as well. But the main thing is my job as a tank is not to just taunt and stand there holding a shield. That is not how you tank. That is embarrassing. You want to use your taunt to get everybody close to you and then hit them all with your sword. Because if you hit 5 people with your sword, you just got a 10% cooldown on all of your abilities, which is insane. Okay, so my typical combo for the Warhammer is I'm going to stun them all, I'm going to level them into the ground, going to hit them with a rend. Depending on what Warhammer I have, before I hit the rend, I might hit them with a heavy attack to apply an extra rend. So if you have the right Warhammer, you're doing 3 rends, 2 from your Sundering Shockwave and your Armor Breaker, but then also from your Trenchant Rend ability if you have that on your Warhammer. But then switching back over to the sword, because you got to keep in mind that your light armor DPS are doing way more damage than you. So if you switch back to your sword, you're giving them a 10% damage buff yet again.
But if you had to give somebody a piece of advice, they've just started playing, they just want to be a tank, what would be the advice you would give them? You know, the first thing, if they take away anything from this, what would be, you know, the piece of advice you want to give them?
If I could give just one piece of advice, it is the gear does not make the tank makes the tank. And you can do a lot more as an experienced tank in worse gear than someone who has just bought out the market on all the worded gear in the world but has never done the dungeon before. You saw that a lot when the mutation for Dynasty first came out. People that had not done Dynasty a lot had no idea when to dodge, and the final boss in Dynasty, you don't even have to block. You can just dodge everything that is damaging coming at you. So experience. Just keep practicing, keep grinding until you understand the attack patterns. Once you know attack patterns, then you'll find yourself blocking a lot less, dodging when needed, and dealing a lot more damage and holding a lot more threat.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Hopefully, if people enjoy this, maybe we can do like some specific dungeon. Oh, enlightening. Some specific dungeons and see how you like go through maybe like a mutation or 2 and see how you tank those. But I appreciate it, and it's been a very long video, and I appreciate your time.
No problem. Thanks for having me on.